Hey everyone, how are you? This is a crash course on Git where I will cover all the important concepts of Git. I will tell you what is Git and how to use Git, and I will tell you a set of commands which you should actually know if you want to use Git in the real world. And if you know all those commands, if you know how to use those commands, you will have 90% of the knowledge which you actually need to work on a Git project. Now, what exactly is Git? It's basically a version control system. And what is a version control system? A VCS or a version control system can track and manage the changes which are done on a file over time. So if you have a project, and let us say in this project there are hundreds of files, right? Now all these 100 files are created for separate purpose, right? Now whenever there is an update which is done on a particular file, then at that time the file change, right? The content of the file changes. But sometime we might want to know what was the previous content on the file. Now it is very hard to store the copies of the file for every change. And exactly at that point, we need something called as VCS, a version control system. Whenever there is a change on a particular file or multiple files, all the changes are tracked and managed over time. And you can go back and see the content of your file in different times. So whenever you are working on a project, you might need a VCS to track and manage the changes to files over time. And there you can use something like Git. Git is also distributed. It means everybody who is working on the project has their own local copy of the full repository or the actual project content. When we say repository, it means the project and its content, right? So this is what Git is. In this video, in this course, I am going to cover all these concepts. These are the learning step of Git. If you can cover all these concepts and if you have a good working knowledge on these concepts which are listed here on the screen, then you have the 90% of the knowledge of Git which you will actually use in real world. So the learning steps are, we should know how to set up our username and email configuration. Basically, whenever there is any change which is done on your repository or the project, basically repository nothing but your project. So whenever there is any change or anything which is done on your project, that should be done by somebody, right? So that somebody will have a username and an email. We will configure that. We will create a project from scratch. Now that project will not have anything. We are going to create a sample project, or what I can say is a repo or repository. So when I say a repo, it's nothing but a repository, right? And a repository is nothing but a project. We are going to create a sample project and we are going to see how to clone an existing repo or existing project. We are going to see how to add the untracked files to stage. We are going to see what is stage. We are also going to see how to unstage a staged file, how to check the current status of our Git project, how to commit our change to Git repository. Now, when I say a Git repository, it's basically a repository only, which is managed by Git. And when I say repository, it's a project. We are going to see how to work with branches, how to create branches, switch branches, delete a branch, merge a branch, and what exactly is a branch, right? We are going to see how to add a remote Git URL, how to work with a Git project which is remotely hosted or basically hosted on cloud, something like GitHub. We are going to see how to push changes to remote URL, how to pull changes from your remote URL, and how to clone a project from remote URL. So all these things is going to make you a really good Git user. And let us start. So first of all, we are going to understand what exactly is a project and what does a project have when we say it is a Git project. See, the thing is, a simple way to understand is Git is nothing but a software which can work as a version control system, right? So why do a project needs to be a Git project? A project needs to be a Git project because we want our project files to be tracked and managed. We want to know what was the code in our file at a particular time. So instead of having a normal project, we are going to have our project as a Git project. I will tell you how to create a project and how to make that project a Git project. And basically when we have a Git project, we are going to have something like working directory where our actual code is being written. There is a staging area, which is a temporary area where our staged file, when we have some files in our project directory, then we stage our files. So we stage our files in something called as staging area, which is a temporary area. And I will tell you what is a staged file, why do we need to stage a file. And then there is the actual Git repository. So first of all, let us create our working directory, our actual project directory. So I will be using the Virtual Studio Code for this. And let's create a project. So let me name my project as sample. So I can say mkdir sample. So basically I'm creating a folder named as sample. In this sample folder, I'm going to have my project files. So right now what I actually have is a folder named as Git Learning, inside which I have a project folder sample. In this sample, I will have my files, right? But as of now, it is just a working directory. It is not a Git project. It is just a working directory or our project directory. It is not related to Git at all. So we have to use some Git commands to make this project, the sample, as a Git project. So right now my terminal is pointing to Git learning folder. Let me go to my project folder, which is sample. So cd space sample. Now I'm in the sample folder. My terminal is pointing to the sample folder. The first command which you should know is git space init. Now what this will do is, this will make my sample project folder as a Git project. So once I hit enter, it will say initialize the empty Git repository in d/coding tools learning git learning /sample/git. It created a folder named as .git. This sample has a folder named as .git. You will not be able to see because it is hidden and we don't really need to see it. But let me actually show you how the folder will look like. So let me reveal this in File Explorer. Let me show you the folder. This is my sample folder. If I go in this folder, you will not be able to see anything. But let me show you the hidden items, and then you will see a folder named as .git. Once you have this .git folder in your project folder, now you can say that this sample project is now a Git project or a Git repository. This .git folder will have a lot of files. We don't need to care about these files, but all the changes to a particular file is tracked using this .git folder. So this .git folder has made our project, a normal project, as a Git project. Now it has a working directory, the project folder, which is sample. It will have a staging area and the Git repository itself. All are under this .git folder. Now we don't need to touch this particular folder. Everything will be managed by the Git software. We can directly have our code and everything here in our sample project. Now once you have initialized an empty Git repository, let me clear the console. The next thing which you should know is how to add your files to staged area. Now before this, you should know what is staging area or staged area, right? Now let me actually do one thing. Let me go to the sample project, and in this, let's create a file and name this file as file1.txt. Okay. All right. So first of all, you don't need to worry about the project, that what this project is going to do. It's just a sample project. Our goal is to understand about Git and how it manages and tracks the files in our project or in our repository. So try to think about this file 1.txt as a required file in your project, and let us say the content is initial code. Save this. Right now this file1.txt file is there in the working directory. This sample is our working directory. We want to push this file1.txt in our Git repository. Basically the .git folder should actually track this file. As of now, any changes which are done in this file1.txt, let us say if I just add one more line, initial code plus change. So earlier my code was initial code, now it has initial code plus change. These changes are not being tracked by the Git folder, right? Or by the Git software. We want that this particular file 1.txt should be tracked by the Git repository, so that anytime we do a change to this file, we should actually know what was the change. So for this, we will have to move our file from the working directory to the Git repository, right? So that the Git repository tracks our file. Now before directly moving our file to the Git repository, we will have to move it to a staging area. Now this staging area is a temporary area where you move your files and you tell Git that Git, I am about to add this file in your Git repository. For now, I'm just adding it in the temporary area. The reason I will be adding it in my temporary area is every time we push any change from the working directory to the Git repository, what we are actually doing is we are committing our change. So let us say we do a commit, and let us say we do a commit C1, and then again we do some change in our file, and then again do a change. So this is C2. So our actual tracking is, we can see what was the code when we committed this C2 and what was the code when we committed the C1. So you can see the changes in your file between C1 to C2, right? Now you don't want to just commit every single line of change every time you do a change. For example, I don't want that if I just say +1, if I add just one line, I want this change to be tracked exactly. Or maybe if I just add two lines, I want to track this change. No, I want that I complete a particular part of my code and then I do the commit, then I do add my code to the Git repository, so that every time we have a commit and we track a particular commit, we could actually see a relevant change, right? So instead of moving all our changes to the Git repository, we move a particular file or all the changed file from the working directory to the staging area. We only do the commit when we are sure that all the files which are there in the temporary staging area are ready to be committed. And we can check the status of all our changed file which are there in the working directory or the staging area using a command called as git space status. If you run this command, what you are going to see is, you are going to see a text which is on branch main. Right now we are working on a branch called as main branch. You don't need to worry about the concept of branch. I am going to tell you what it is. and it will say there are no commits yet. There is nothing which is done or committed on the Git repository. Right now in your working directory, you have this file, file1.txt, but you do not have anything in the Git repository. But what you can see is an untracked list of files which says use git add file name to include in what will be committed. The file file1.txt is untracked. The Git repository doesn't know about this file file1.txt, so it is suggesting you to use this particular command so that the next time when you do a commit, and when we say we are doing a commit, we are basically pushing our change to the Git repository. So the next time we are pushing our change to the Git repository, this file1.txt is tracked and its changes are there. So there is nothing which needs to be added to commit, but untracked files are present. It means as of now there is nothing in the staging area, because the flow is your code or your file will move from the working directory to the staging area, and then it will be committed to the Git repository. So there is nothing in the staging area, so it is saying that nothing which is added to commit, but there are some files, some untracked files which are present in the working directory but are still not being tracked by the Git repository. So add it in the staging area, then push it to the Git repository. That's the basic working flow. So next is we need to know how to add our file to the staging area. For this you have to run the command git add file name, and the file name is file1.txt. Hit enter, and now what you will see is when you say git status, you will see some change. You will see that on branch main, we are still on the main branch. There are still no commits, but there are some changes which has to be committed. There is a new file which is added in our staged area. We can unstage the file. We will see how to unstage a file. For now, don't worry about this message. But what you see right now is there is a new file which is there in the staged area, the temporary staging area. Your file is moved from working directory to staging area. Now you can push it to the Git repository, and then I will tell you what's the use of pushing your change or committing a change to the Git repository. For now, you have added your file in the Git staging area. Now let's add your file. Let's commit your file to the Git repository. To commit your file, you will have to run the command git space commit. Now, whenever you do a commit, you should add a message. What is this message and how do we add it? Basically, when you have multiple commits, let us say you have a project and there are commits C1, C2, and let us say there is 100 of commits. And if I am your teammate and I want to know, or not even your teammate, even if you want to just go back and look at the commit C2 and want to know what happened at this particular change. Your project was at this particular stage, C1 stage, you do some change and now it is in the C2 stage. Your project had some change and we have the commit C1, then you do another change, now the commit is C2, and you want to know what was the change in C2. It will be hard for you to just go through the code and find out what was the change. But if you have a message for every commit, if you have a simple message that added a particular feature, then you will be able to understand, okay, this was the change which has happened, and then that's why we have a commit. So that's why we have to give a message whenever we are doing a commit. So to give a message, we can say git space commit -m, and then you can give your message. And let's give the message as added first file. Hit enter, and now what you will see is there is a commit which has happened, and this is your commit ID. This is not the full commit ID. The full commit ID is too big. It's just the initial part of your commit ID. Every time you do a commit, you get an ID, a commit ID. This was your commit message. And what happened is there is one file which got changed. Basically, this file1.txt got added and 4 insertions. So basically, there are 4 line of codes which got added in your file, and the file was file1.txt. So what we have basically done as of now is we have a file file1.txt. We created the file in our working directory, moved it to staging area, and then moved it to Git repository. Now there is one more thing which we can do. Let's add 2 more files and name it as file2.txt and one more file as file3.txt. Now let us say in the file2.txt we add some code. Let's say we add the code as print my message, and in the file3.txt I added some more code which is print how are you. Simple. These are my line of code in my files, right? As of now everything is very simple. Right now if I just run a command git status, status will give you the current status of your files. Basically, what are the files which got changed. When I hit enter, you will see there is no mention of file1.txt because file1.txt is already committed. The Git repository knows about this file and there is no more change which has happened on the file. The Git repo already know that this was the code, this was the content of your file, still it is the content. So when I say git status, it is not mentioning the file1.txt, but when I say git status, it is mentioning that there are some untracked files. There are 2 untracked files, file2.txt, file3.txt. So you already know how to add these files to your Git repository. For this, you will have to move it to the staging area, then to the Git repository. But there are two files, right? Now, one of the way to move is I can say git space file 2.txt, not git space file 2.txt, but git add space file 2.txt. And when I will say hit enter, clear the console and run the command git status again, you will see that there are some changes which has to be committed. The new file is file 2.txt, and there are some untracked changes which is file 3.txt, right? And also let me do one thing. Let me add one more line of code in the file 1.txt. Now try to understand what's exactly happening here. If I say git status, try to understand the message, and it is very important. Right now we are on the main branch. There are some changes which has to be committed. There is a new file called as file2.txt, and then there is changes that are not staged for commit. So basically we have a file called as file1.txt, and this time it is not saying new file, it is a modified file, right? It means the Git repository already knows about the file file1.txt. It is tracking this file, right? And there was changes which was done on this. There was some line of code which got added on this file. So for this particular file file1.txt, we have a modified change, and there is another file called as file3.txt which is untracked. There is a file in our working directory file3.txt, but it is not in the staging area. So try to think about this. There is a project, the sample project. It has three files: file1, file2, file3. First of all, you will have to understand that all the three files will be there in the working directory. But whenever I will do a change on the file 1, because we have already pushed our file 1 to the Git repository, the Git repository will have the track of what was the file last time when we did the commit. So it knows about the content of the file last time, and now there is a modified change in the working directory. The file which is there in the working directory, the file 1 got modified. Now we will have to move that modified change to the Git repository again. So we will have to follow the same process. Push our file to staging area to the Git repository. Talking about the file 2 we have moved this to the staging directory, right? We have moved the file to the stage directory. So this particular file 2 is ready to be added to the Git repository. And when we say file 3, the file 3 is still in the working directory, not moved to the stage directory. Now my question to you is how to move these changes, the changes on the file1.txt is modified, file 2 is newly added, and file 3 is untracked, to the Git repository. So let me clear the console and let me tell you. First of all, we will have to add all the files which we want to move to the Git repository to the staging area. And to add all the files, we can say git add space file name. Now if there are multiple files, then there is one more way which is called git add dot. When you say dot, it is going to add all the files on which there is any change to the Git staging area. So when we have done the changes in all the three files and we run the command git space add space dot, then all the three files will be added to the staging area. The file with its content which is there in the current working directory will be moved to the staging area. And now if I say git add dot enter, and then if I say git space status, then you will see that there are three files. Two are new files, one is a modified file, and now they are ready to be committed. If I clear the console and to push the changes to the Git repository, I can say git space commit space -m and then give the message. Let's give the message as added multiple files, right? Hit enter, and now there is another commit ID which got created. Added multiple files for the commit text. Three files were changed. There were 5 insertions and 1 deletion. And for two of the file, which is file2.txt and file3.txt, it has used the create mode because they were not added to the Git repository. So it has added it, right? So after you have run the command, all the three files, file1.txt, file2.txt and file3.txt are now moved to the Git repository. There is still a local working directory on which you are going to work. This is the actual working directory, the sample directory where you are working. But then there is a Git repository where the changes on the files are being tracked. Now, if I want to see what are the previous commits which has happened on my repository, the sample project, then I can say git space log. Hit enter, and now you can see that we have 2 commits which has happened on this particular repository. This was our first commit, and you can see the author, that's the username, and that's the email of the author. Now that's the person who have actually done the commit, who have actually done the change. And in this commit, the message is added first file. This message is going to help me to understand what was the change which has happened in this particular commit. It is not going to tell me exactly what changed, but this is going to just give me an idea. And again, we have done another commit. The second commit was added multiple files. So you can see this particular commit as well. So you can see the second commit as well. And all these commits are happening on the main branch. I will tell you the concept of branches, but right now, just try to understand. Right now, we are doing all the changes in the main branch. Now the thing is, you will also have to configure these things, the username and the email. To configure this particular detail, you will just have to clear the console and you will have to first provide that username and email. So to provide the username and email, you can type the command git space config -- global space user dot name, and then you can type your username. So I will type my own username which I want to use as an identification for my git username. Hit enter, and to configure the email, I can use the same command, but instead of user dot name, I can say user dot email and then provide my email. So if I just write my email, hit enter, now my username and email will be configured. Now to confirm these values, I can just say git config user dot name. You can see my username, and if I say git config user dot email, you can see my user email, right? So this is how you can set up your username and email configuration. We have already seen how to create a new repository or a new project. We are going to see how to clone an existing repository. We have seen how to add any untracked file to stage, how to check the current status as well. That's also we have seen. We have seen how to commit our changes to the Git repository. Next is we are going to see how to work with branches, but before that, let us see how to unstage a change. Now, why do you want to unstage a changed, or how to unstage a staged file? Now, when we say staged file, it is a file which is there in the staging area. So basically, if you have a file1 which is as of now in the working directory and you do a change on this, now that is ready to be pushed to the Git repository. So you will first add it to staging area, right? What if you add it to the staging area and then later on you think that, okay, I don't actually want this file1 in the staging area, then you can unstage it back. Now let me tell you one use case where you can actually want this particular thing. So let us say you have file1 where you added one line of code. So let's say added one line. In the file2 you added another line, let us say print ABC, and in the file3 you added another line, let us say print 1 plus 2. Now if you see the current status of your project, git space status, you can see that there are some files, there are some changes which are not staged for commit, which is file1.txt, file2 and file3.txt. all are modified. It means Git knows about this file, but they are not ready for commit because they are not staged. So let us say you want to push all the changes of these files to the Git repository as a commit. So you might want to first add it to the staging area, and you can say git space add space dot, right? Now at this point, if you just add it, you added all your file to the staging area, right? All the three changes to the file, file1.txt, file2.txt, file3.txt, it is added in the staging area, right? What if later on you realize that file2.txt is fine, file3.txt is fine, but file1.txt change is actually not fine? So at this point, there are two choices. Now you might just want to update the file1.txt to make it right, and then you can add that modified content to the staging area and then push all the changes to the three files as a commit in the Git repository. But then the changes of file2 and file3 will still sit in the staging area and will have to wait for the file1 to be completed to be pushed to the Git repository, right? There is another option, which is you can unstage this change. You can say that, okay, I don't want to stage the changes of the file1, let me unstage it. To unstage your changes of the file1.txt, you can type the command git space reset space file name. So my file is file1.txt, hit enter, and now you can see a message which says unstaged the changes after reset. Now your file2.txt, file3.txt is ready to be pushed, but your file1.txt changes will not be pushed. If you see the status, git space status, you can see that on the main branch there are some changes to be committed. These are the two files, file2.txt and file3.txt. They are in the staging area, but the file1.txt is not staged as of now. So if you do the commit, the file1.txt with changes will not be pushed to the Git repository, but the changes of file2.txt and file3.txt will be pushed to the Git repository. And now I can simply say clear the console, and I can say git space commit space -m. Let's add a message, changes to two files. Hit enter, and now you will see that the changes of the two files are added as a commit. And if you want to see the commit list, you can say git space log, and you can see changes to two files. There is another commit which got created by this particular author. So now you know how to unstage a staged file. Next is, let us see how to work with branches. And why do I want to work with something called as branches? As of now, whatever we are working on the sample project, we are working on the main branch. When we say branch, branches are nothing but a workspace of your project. When I say workspace, it means it can have multiple places of area where you can work, do the commits on the same file, but it will not be affected in some other workspace or in the some other area. So right now when we are working on the project, the sample project, we are working on the main branch, the main workspace area. Right now we have three files, right? Now imagine a situation where you have, let us say, two developers who are working on the same project. There is developer 1 and there is developer 2, right? Now, if these two developers are working on the same project, the sample project, and let us say the developer 1 wants to add a file and developer 2 wants to add a file, right? Then one of the ways they will directly work on the main branch and add their own file and do the commits. Or there is a better way, which is they will create their own working area or a workspace area, which is like the branch. Now branches are nothing but a pointer to a particular commit. As of now, when I say main branch, my main branch is as of now pointing to a particular commit. If I go back to the VS Code and I say git space log, as of now, the head of my main branch is pointing to this particular commit. So it means that at this particular commit, when I say changes to two files, whatever was my code, that is the latest code in the main branch. Before this particular commit, there are still some commits, but right now my main branch is pointing to this particular commit. If I do any change directly on the main branch, my main branch is going to point to some other commit, some latest commit, right? And there will be changes which will be done. But what if the developer 1 and developer 2 are working on some separate features? If the developer 1 and developer 2 both start working on the same branch, and the sample project we have is, let us say, deployed somewhere in the cloud or anywhere it is deployed, and if you do the change and the developer 1 is ready with its change, the developer 2 is not ready with its change, then there might be a clash and your project might be unstable, right? So a better way is they will have their own workspace or their own branch on which they are going to work, and once their work is complete, they will just push their own changes to the branch, to the main branch. Let us say your main branch is the branch which will be used in production, right? So the developer will be working on their own separate branches and they will be doing the changes. So let's create two different branches. This is the branch for developer 1. So let us say D1 branch, and let's create one more branch which is the D2 branch. This is D2 branch, okay? Now at this point, what happens is when you create a branch, you will have to create a branch from some other branch. Initially you have a main branch. When you will create a D1 branch, you will create the D1 branch from some other existing branch. So let us say the D1 and D2, both the branches are created from the main branch. So now this is a separate working space, a separate workspace area where you can do any changes and nothing will happen in the main branch. The files in the main branch will still remain the same. Similarly with D2, all the changes which you are going to do on the D2 branch will not be affected in the main branch. So your main branch is fit and fine, and all your developers are happy because they have their own branches or their own workspace area to work with. Now let's try this. First of all, how to list all the branches we have as of now? We can say git space branch. Hit enter and you will see that we have the main branch, and right now we are pointing to the main branch. We are working on the main branch. All the code which you see right now is of the main branch. To create another branch, let us say we want to create a branch D1, we can say git space checkout -b space branch name. Let us say the branch name is D1, hit enter. At this point, you will see that we have switched to a new branch which is D1. Now if I say git space branch, hit enter, you will see that we have two branches, the D1 and the main. The content in D1 is same as it is in main, but we are right now pointing to the D1 branch. If I clear the console and run the command git space log, hit enter, you will see that right now we are pointing to the D1 branch. We are on the D1 branch, and my D1 branch is actually pointing to a commit. This is the latest commit, or basically this is the latest change in our code or in our project, and the latest change says that changes to two files. So whatever is my code looking like at this particular time of commit, that particular code is there in the D1 branch. So that is why I told you guys that every branch is nothing but a pointer to a particular commit. Now if I will say git space status, you will see that we have one modified file which is file1.txt, which is still not ready for commit because the changes are not staged. You remember that we unstaged the staged file1.txt, and that is why it is still not staged and still not ready for commit. Right now we are working on the D1 branch. If I say that git space add space dot, or let us say file1.txt, so we are pushing this file1.txt to the stage area, right? Now if I will say git space commit, if I want to commit the change to the repository and give a message that added f1 file in another branch, hit enter. At this point, if I will say git space status, you will see that we are right now on the D1 branch and there are nothing to be committed and the working tree is clean. There is no changes in our working tree files. But what if I will say git space log? At this point, you need to try to understand that we are on the D1 branch. The D1 branch is actually pointing to this particular commit which we just did right now, and the commit name was added F1 file in another branch. But our main branch is actually pointing to some other commit. This was the commit, the changes to two files. That was the previous commit before we did this particular commit, right? Now, if I want to switch back to my main branch, I have to say git space checkout space main. Now here you will not have to say -b, we have to say -b if we want to create the branch and then check out or switch to that particular branch. The main branch is already created, so we just need to say git space checkout space main to switch to the main branch. When I will say enter, so right now we have switched to the main branch. All right. If I will say git space branch, you will see that these are the two branches I have, right? Now what I want to show you is, if I say git log, you will see that my main branch is actually right now pointing to this particular commit, changes to two files. The main branch now doesn't know about the change which has happened on the file1.txt. If I will show you the content of file1.txt, you will see that you have 6 lines of code, right? Now if I will switch back to the d1 branch, git space checkout space d1, hit enter, you will see that in this branch the file1.txt has some other content, some different content, and that is because we have done some change on the file1 which was in the d1 branch, and those changes are committed, right? So when we say committed, in the d1 branch we have all these three files. The file1 changes is there in the git repository, is updated in the d1 branch. All these branches, the main branch, the d1 branch, or even if we create a d2 branch, all these branches will have a separate workspace. It will look like we are working on a separate folder or a separate project. So this is the power of Git. So now we know how to create a branch, how to switch a branch. Now how to delete a branch? We should know how to delete a branch, right? But before I show you how to delete a branch, let me actually show you how to merge a branch. Right now, the file1.txt has some extra lines, right? Added one line. If I want to merge this change back to my main branch is actually the production branch. The d1 branch, if I say git space branch, you will see that we are right now on the d1 branch. The d1 branch is just for a developer or just for a particular feature to work on, right? Once the feature code is done and tested, you can now push the changes back to the main branch, and that is the power of Git. You don't need to actually do the change in the main branch. Create a main branch and then create another branches out of it, and then work on that particular branch, test your code, and then push it back to main, so that your main code is always stable. Now if I want to push the changes of d1 to main, I will have to go to the main branch. So let me go to main branch. So I can say git space checkout space main, hit enter, and now I can say git space merge space d1. Which branch do you want to merge to main branch? Right now we are in the main branch. I want to merge the d1 branch code to my main branch, hit enter, and now you will see that added one line. This change has come to the main branch. Now let me show you the log, git log. You will see that my head is pointing to the main branch, and the main branch is pointing to added f1 file in another branch. If you remember, we did this particular commit in the d1 branch, but we have brought that change back to the main branch. So if you have multiple developers working on multiple features, then simply you can create your main branch. You can create multiple branches out of the main branch, do changes in your feature branches or the d1 branch or whatever branch you have, and then you can push back your change to the main branch, right? So that only the tested code, the actual real code which you want to push to production, is there in the main branch. So now that we know how to merge your change to a branch, let us see how to delete a branch. So to delete a branch, I can say git space branch space -d space branch name. So my branch name is d1, hit enter, deleted branch d1, it was done. The branch d1 is done, and now if I show you the git branch, you will see that we just have one branch, which is main. So we just have one working directory or one working space, right? Now let me show you one more thing. If we say git space log, right, we will see that there are multiple commits, right? Now what if we want to see what was the content in our code at this particular commit? So we can just copy this particular commit ID. Let me just copy this. So I can just select this, press Ctrl C, copy the commit ID, and once I have the commit ID with me, I can say git space show space the commit ID. Once I press enter, you will see that what were the changes which were done at this particular commit. So you can see this message is changes to two files. In this particular commit, there are changes to two files. The two files are file2.txt and file3.txt. In the file2.txt, one line of code was removed, which was print my message, and two lines of code were added, which is print my message and print abc. So from here, what you can understand is you can just look at a particular commit and you can actually know what was the change which has happened in this particular commit. And you can view it file by file. There are two files. I can see for file 2. I can also see for file 3. In the file 3, I can say that one line of code was removed, it is red, and 2 lines of code were added. So this is how you can just see what were the changes which were done in a particular commit. Right now, whatever Git repository we are working on, this repository is local hosted, right? Locally hosted, or the scope of this repository is within my local system. There are many famous cloud hosted Git environment such as GitHub, GitLab, where you can work on and do all these things on cloud, so that multiple people can actually work on the same code without actually being present at the same place. The repository will be hosted online or on the cloud, and people can work using these Git commands just like they're working on their own system. So for the demonstration of this part, where I will show you to add a remote Git URL, to push your changes to a remote URL, to pull your changes from the remote URL, and to clone a remote URL. I will also show you how to clone a local URL as well, or a local repository as well. You just need a URL. All these things can actually be done if you have a cloud hosted Git environment, and I would say one of the best is GitHub. So if you do not have a GitHub account, just have it. It is free to use, and go to GitHub. So let me actually open my GitHub account, github.com. First of all, you will have to create a new repository or a new project, I would say. So I can say new, click on new, and then name your repository, give a name to your repository. So let me name it as sample. You can give some description to it as well, and you can choose the visibility. If you want it to make it public, you can keep it public. If you want to make it private, you can keep it private. I will keep it public. Do I want to add a readme file? Do I want to add a gitignore or a license? If you want, you can add it. Basically, a readme file is just a file where you add the details about your repository. A .gitignore file is a file where you will specify what are the different files which you want the Git software to not track at all. Why do I want a .gitignore file is, let us say I have a file in my project. Let's name the file as credentials, and let's say this file contains some credentials. Let's say the password is equal to 123. Now this credentials file is a very important file, right? You don't want this important file to be shared with everyone. So in this case, you add a file called as .gitignore in your project, and in the .gitignore file you will have to specify what are the files which you want the Git to ignore. So let me actually add it. So in my project, let's add a file .gitignore, right? And in this, let's mention a file name as credentials. I don't want the file named as credentials to be tracked. So now this credentials file will not be tracked, or any kind of change in this file will not be tracked by the Git repository. Let's run the command git space status now, and you will see that we have one untracked file, but that's not credentials. It's actually the .gitignore file, right? If I remove this credentials from here, save this, and if I run the command again, we have two files which needs to be tracked or added to the staged area. But if I just add it back, that in the gitignore file I've added this file name, this should not be tracked, so it will not be tracked. Let me actually push the change. Let's say git space add space dot. So we have added this .gitignore file in the staging area. Let's add the commit, git space commits -m, message is added gitignore file. So that commit is done. And now let's go back to our browser, create the repository as of now. And once the repository is created, in the background, what happens is there is a Git repository gets created in a system in cloud. We want to access that particular repository, right? If I want to access that particular repository and work on that particular repo, we want some kind of URL, and you can actually find that URL here. This is the URL. You can work on this particular repo using HTTPS or SSH as well. Let's use the HTTPS for now. Copy this URL link, go back to your code editor, and let us see our task. The task is to add a remote Git URL. Once you add this Git URL, a remote Git URL, you can actually push all your changes directly in that particular repo, in the repository which is created on GitHub, hosted on the internet in cloud, right? So we can say git space remote space add space. We have to provide the name of our remote repository URL. It's not the URL, it's actually the name of your URL. It's just like an identification. So let's identify this as origin. This is one of the most used name for a remote URL, and let's paste your URL. So basically what we are doing is we are actually adding a remote URL, and we are naming that remote URL as origin. We can use this origin word to actually access this particular URL. So we are adding a remote URL, git remote add origin space URL, hit enter. And now once this URL is added, we can push our changes to that remote URL. Whatever changes we have here, we can push it. So we can say git space push space origin space main. The git push command is used to push your changes to a remote URL. What's the remote URL? The remote URL is actually identified by this word origin, and this is the branch where I want to push my change. This is the branch of the remote URL or the remote repository, the remote or the cloud hosted Git repository. Hit enter, wait for some time, and this will push the changes. But since you are pushing the change, you should actually be an authorized person to push this change, right? I cannot just open the GitHub URL of anyone and push the change. So since I am pushing a change to my account, I will actually have to provide some kind of token, right? So we have to log into GitHub or provide some kind of token so that our Git command, the local Git software, it can access our GitHub and push the changes. So I can use the sign in with your browser option. Click on the sign in with your browser. Your browser will open, and now you can see that it wants the access to my account. If I will authorize this Git ecosystem, once the authorization is done, it might ask me the password as well. So let me actually provide the password here. Once I provide the password, you can see that the authentication succeeded. You may now close this tab and return to the application. Now, once I have closed my tab, you can see that we got some logs. The log says that please complete authentication in your browser. It is completed. Enumerating the objects, 18 are done. There are some 18 objects which are done. Basically, these are some generic messages which is representing what are the changes which goes to the remote Git URL or the remote Git repository. And finally, you will see a message writing objects 100% done. It means all your objects, there are 18 objects, all those 18 objects are actually pushed to your remote repository. Go to your remote repository, refresh the page, and now you will see the code here, right? You can find all the code as well and all the commits as well. You can click on the commits and you will see that these were the different commits which we have actually done on our main branch, and you can find those commits. If I go to a particular commit, let us say changes to two files, we can see that what were the changes which has happened in the two files, file 2.txt, file 3.txt, what was the change, right? So this is how you push your changes to a remote URL or a remote repository. Now what if there is a change which has happened on your remote repository? Now since your remote repository can be accessed by multiple people, there can be a repository which is being worked by multiple people, then there might be a file which got changed. If you are working locally and if you want that particular change in your own repository, let me actually show you one example. Let's add a readme file directly from this UI, the GitHub UI. When I say add readme, and in the readme, let's add that it's a readme file, right? Commit the change, it will ask you the message. So let's actually give a message as add initial readme file. Commit the changes directly to the main branch, and once this is done, you will see that in the remote repository you have a file readme.md, but in the local repository you do not have that file in your local system. So you will have to pull the changes from the remote URL, and to pull the changes you can say git space pull space origin. I want to pull from origin's main branch into my own main branch. I want to pull the code from origin to my own main branch. Hit enter. It will pull the changes, and now you will see that we have a readme file, and the readme file content is it's a readme file. This particular change is actually pulled from the remote repository, since my local repository and the remote repository are now connected using the remote URL origin, right? So now we know how to push a change to the remote URL, how to pull a change from the remote URL. What if you want to clone a remote URL or a remote repository? Now before we clone a remote repository, let me tell you the concept of cloning. Basically, if you have a Git project, let us say sample is a Git project, right? If you want to work on this sample project, or if somebody else wants to work on this sample project, they can actually clone this project or copy the project in their own system or in their own folder. You just need the URL and the access to that particular URL. Now let's try with a local URL. If I just right click this folder and click on copy relative path, and let's go back one folder. Let's say we are on the Git learning folder. Let's create a folder here. Let's name the folder as test. Go to the test folder. Now let us say in my test folder, I want to have the project sample, which is being worked by somebody, and we have the URL of the sample, the Git URL, right? So I can say git clone and then paste the URL. Let me actually copy the URL again. So I can say copy path and paste the URL, hit enter. Now you will see cloning into sample done. So what happened is the sample project now got cloned in this test folder. Inside the test folder, you have another folder now, which is called as sample, and it will have all the content of this particular file or your particular project. File 1.txt, file 2, file 3, readme, and the .git ignore. All the files are there, right? So this is how you can clone a project which is hosted at a particular URL. Right now we were using the local URL. Let me do one thing. Let me remove or delete this particular sample folder. What if I do not have this project in my local URL? I have the project in a remote URL, something like in GitHub. So I need the remote URL. We can just have the remote URL. We can go to the repository homepage, and then you will find this code. Below the code, you will find this particular link, https://github.com/ your username / the repository.git. copy this particular URL and then type the same command git space clone and provide the URL. Hit enter, and now it is cloning into sample. It is cloning from the remote URL. 21 objects were cloning. It got, and finally you will see the message done and done. It means all the objects or all the files are now cloned. You can find your inside the test folder. You can find your folder sample which got cloned in your own system. So this is called cloning a repository. Now, if you know all these commands, let me reiterate to you. If you know how to set up your username and email configuration, create a new repository, or make a particular project, existing project, as a new GitHub repository using the git init command, then you have the clone option, which we just saw how to clone your project if you have an existing repository, how to add an untracked file to stage area, how to unstage your staged file, how to check the current status, and logs. Let me actually say logs as well. You can use the command git log. It will tell you the different commits which has happened on your current branch. You should know how to commit or change to the Git repository and work with the branches, creating the branch, switching from branch, deleting a branch, merging two branches, adding a remote Git URL, pushing your change to a remote URL, pulling your change from the remote URL, and cloning your repository from a remote URL. If you know all these things, you already know the 90% of the things which you should know as a Git user. And if you know the 90% of the things, I think that's enough for you to get started and start working on a Git project and call yourself as someone who knows about Git and can work on Git projects. Now, Git projects are nothing special. It's just a project which is tracked by Git for version control system, so that all the changes in your different files are being tracked. So guys, I think that's it for this particular crash course. And in this particular crash course, we have seen all these things. And if you got to know everything, if you understood everything, then it is really good. But if you have any questions, then put it in the comment box. I will surely reply to your queries. And for now, if you like the video, then make sure that you like it. And if you are not subscribed to my channel as of now, then make sure that you do so. And I will see you guys in another video. I want to see you guys in my next video. Thank you for watching this one.